And as promised at the beginning of the program, in our third hour here, Congressman Rick Nolan is with us. He represents the 8th District of Minnesota. Nolan.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at US Rep Rick Nolan, N-O-L-A-N, Rick, R-I-C-K. And Congressman Nolan, one of the finest and great progressive members of the House of Representatives. I am so honored and pleased to have you back with us.
Oh, thanks for those kind words.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll accept them. Thank you.
Yeah. And what I'd like to say to our listeners and to the folks who are on hold for Anything Goes Friday here is that Congressman Nolan and I are going to talk for a few minutes. We're going to do this sort of like our old Brunch with Bernie things. We will talk for a little while, and then after we've finished, I've got a little punch list of things that I want to talk to him about. After we're done with that, then we will just start picking up calls, whatever you want to talk about, and if the congressman wants to weigh in, and if you have specific questions for him, and in fact, if you can even think about reformulating your question, if you're on hold right now, as a question for the congressman, here's your opportunity to ask a member of the United States House of Representatives, what they think about something. So, to start out, Congressman Nolan, the future of democracy depends on stopping dialing for dollars. This out of the Sunlight Foundation. Tell me about this.
Well, two things. One is that Supreme Court Citizens United decision just changed everything. It resulted in just hundreds of millions and billions, quite frankly, of dollars, secret money, dark money being poured into politics. This had a devastating effect on the system, in not just one, but multiple ways. To start with the polluting of the TV airwaves. But more importantly, it's denigrated the process, it's denigrated the candidates, it's discouraged good people from running, it's greatly diminished people's confidence in our system, and most importantly of all, it's perverted good public policy. So until we reverse Citizens United, that has to be number one.
Right. And the principal way to do that would be to amend the Constitution, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'm afraid. Well, there are two ways it could get done, and in politics, as usual, we'd have to amend the Constitution. But it's one of the reasons why this presidential election contest is pretty important, too. The Supreme Court's been known to reverse itself over the years.
This is essentially Supreme Court-made law. No legislature ever, not state legislature, not federal legislature, no legislature ever said, gee, we should just allow unlimited money in politics.
Thank you for making that point. That's a very important point, Tom. So the Supreme Court could reverse itself. And the next president of the United States is, for sure, has one appointment, and most likely has at least two, and perhaps even a third. So that would dramatically change the shape of the court, which could result in a continuation of Citizens United, or conceivably a reversal of Citizens United. In the absence of that, it would require a constitutional amendment.
Right.
But I think it's important to note that that is one of a number of things that, at least in my judgment, need to be done to really restore the Congress of the United States into a real representative democracy, which it no longer is, and it needs to become again. Because of unleashing all these vast amounts of money, the fact is that if you don't have money to get your message out there, and if you don't have money to defend yourself, well, then you lose.
Right.
It's just that simple.
Yeah.
So
more often than not, it doesn't always work that way. I guess Carly Fiorina and Meg Whitman in California were the exceptions to the rule. But
and people like to point to those. The Ross Perot or the Texas Governor John Connally. But if you study the process, it's usually not necessarily the one who has the most money, but you have to have enough. You have to have enough.
And these days that means you got to have, at least if you're a Republican, you got to have a billionaire behind you, and if you're a Democrat, you've got to have a lot of donors, or you've got to line something up. It's not.
So on the one hand, I don't. The Stop Act has to be a part of cleaning this whole thing up.
Well, I wanted to get to that too,
Yeah.
and in fact, have you? This is what you and Dave Jolly,
David Jolly,
David Jolly are working on. Article 3, Section 2, which defines the Supreme Court, says explicitly. I'll read it to you. In all of first of all, it defines where the court has original jurisdiction, like ambassadors and inter-country disputes and interstate disputes. And then it says, in all of the cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction. In other words, it's the final court of the law. Are you an attorney?
No, but I've studied law,
so
constitutional law.
Yeah, so you know this stuff. Shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and to fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. Now, that's sometimes referred to as court stripping. The last time that it was done that I actually know about was Tom Daschle pushed through a farm bill back 20 years ago that had a provision in it that specifically said the Supreme Court may not rule on this.
Yeah.
And it has happened, it's been done a couple dozen times in the last 50 years. Technically, it's possible. It would provoke a constitutional crisis, particularly if Scalia was still alive. Yeah. If Congress were to pass a law saying, okay, here are the restrictions on money in politics. This is the law. And we are putting in this law a provision citing Article 3, Section 2, that the Supreme Court may not rule on this.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think we could do that. It's not going to happen in this Congress with the majorities that we have in the House and Senate. But yeah, no, I think we
It would be an interesting,
wouldn't it be?
It would certainly bring the whole issue to a boil, because then you'd have an actual constitutional crisis. And frankly, I think we have a constitutional crisis right now.
Oh, I think we do. And considering the makeup of today's court, stranger things have happened in politics. If we would end up with a majority, a new majority in the House and the Senate, I, for one, would, knowing ahead of time what the Supreme Court was likely to do, if we had the other party in charge, I would push hard for an amendment to not only legislation to change the way we do politics, but an amendment to keep the Supreme Court out of it.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I'm with you. So tell me about the STOP Act.
Well, but it simply says is that members of Congress, without getting into the details of the language, says go to Washington and go to work on the people's business. Don't go to Washington and spend all your time in the Republican and Democratic dialing centers across the street raising money. Both parties have a dialing, calling centers.
Right. So you want to make that illegal?
I want to make it illegal. Absolutely.
So how are they going to raise money? Are they going to have surrogates do it, or is this an attempt to get money out of politics?
I have some friends of mine who called me Rick Van Winkle. I served back in the 70s. Nobody called and asked people for money back in the 70s, but we raised money.
Yeah. Go to fundraisers.
Yeah,
we
go to fundraisers. We have volunteers that would call people. Yeah. We went to work. We were working 5 days a week. Everything was coming up under what we call open rules, where anyone could offer an amendment, have it debated, ad nauseum if necessary, and then have it voted on. It was really very, very open.
Real things
democratic.
got done.
Well, yeah, that's how you find common ground.
Yeah.
If everybody at the table's got an opportunity to offer their new idea and have it argued and debated, and even if they lose on the vote, they feel better about it. Right. And if it's a really good idea, they may lose in the beginning, but they will ultimately prevail.
There you go. That music means that we've got to take a break. We'll be right back. Congressman Rick Nolan is with us. U.S. Rep. Rick Nolan. You can tweet him or at Rick Nolan MN. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And we'll be back. Rick and I are talking. We will also be taking, Congressman Nolan and I are talking, and we will be taking your calls as well. As do you. And welcome back. James in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, watching us on Free Speech TV, on Direct TV, and you might want to put your plug into your ear so you can hear a little more clearly. Right. James, you there? Can you hear James,
I'm here waiting
Congressman?
patiently. The reason I called was a little bit of what your conversation drifted into, and it's about the Democratic Party. I used to be a Democratic committee person, and you hear a lot of this. And believe me, I voted for Bernie Sanders. I understand his movement, but I will be 110% behind Hillary Clinton, and I'll do whatever I can to make sure she gets elected. But I hear this
assuming she's the nominee.
About
yes.
opening up your primaries and letting independents vote.
Mm-hmm.
And when it drives me nuts every time I hear that, and the reason is that the party is a party. It's a separate entity. It's not a government. It's a party. It's a party of people that believe in a certain thing. And to turn around and say, and I'm proud of the fact that Pennsylvania has a closed primary, because when I was on a committee, this would come up, and I would argue it to the death. And I said, no, I'm against it. This is not right.
This is our club.
If you want to put it that way, yes, it's our club.
That's how I always put it. Now, I always used to defend open primaries. I'm starting to have second thoughts. But was your question to the congressman, his thoughts on open versus closed primaries?
Yeah, I'd like to know what he thinks about that.
Okay, Congressman Nolan.
Well, James, you've made a wonderfully good case for a closed primary.
Let me make the case for the open primary real quickly, if I may.
Yeah.
And that is that we have a two-party system, whether we like it or not. And, Madison kind of freaked out about it, and we got all that in Federalist Number 10. But we've got this two-party system because of first past the post, winner-take-all elections. We're only one of 7 nations in the world that has that.
Yeah.
And so, given that there's only 2 options of any consequence that's really going to be president, don't both parties have some kind of an obligation to say, yeah, we are going to open up a little bit? So anyhow, that's my...
Yeah. Well, I think you can do both, quite frankly. I think you can have a closed primary as long as you give people an early opportunity to declare themselves as a Democrat or a Republican, and therefore entitle themselves to participate in their primary.
Right.
But I have seen countless examples over the years where the members of one party have participated deliberately in another party. We had a case back in Minnesota a number of years ago where we had a governor that had a serious alcohol problem and therefore a serious performance problem. And we went in and we endorsed the Democrats another candidate who... with the sobriety and the capability to do a good job. Well, the Republican districts in the state voted overwhelmingly for the candidate, and none of them showed up on the general election day. So there's some skullduggery that goes on there.
Yeah.
So as long as the so-called closed system is still open, but if people want to be an independent, that's fine. Have a party. Select the candidate, or wait till the general election and live with who.
So maybe
have decided.
what's called a semi-closed primary, where people can register the same day or within a week or so they can change their party affiliation. That's more of a rational mid-ground.
Yeah,
I think it makes a lot of sense. We'll be right back. Welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Congressman Rick Nolan is in the studio with us. Representing the great state of Minnesota, and nolan.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rick Nolan MN or at US Rep Rick Nolan. Before we pick up any more calls, the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, if you don't mind, and if there's anything on your mind, feel free to hop in, is there's 28 pages on the 9/11 thing, the Saudis. What's the deal? What's going on here? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I have great confidence in the ability of the American public to make good voting choices about critical public policy issues if they're given all the facts,
right,
and they're given all the information.
Right.
And one of the problems with this so-called wars of choice or so-called nation building abroad is that the American public have not been given the facts. And so they've found themselves supporting things that they, I'm sure, might otherwise never have supported had they had the information. I was up in the Tora Bora, met with the Mujahideen when They were fighting the Russians in Afghanistan.
Oh, wow. You knew Charlie Wilson.
I did indeed. I did indeed. Some years later, I was living and working in Abu Dhabi, and Charlie would pass through on his way there, and he was always trying to get me to assist him in convincing the United Arab Emirates to join the United States in helping to fund the Mujahideen. But after I was up in the Tora Bora and met with them in some of that desolate land up there, there were thousands of them at the time, and they wanted more American guns and weapons, and we told them that no, the official U.S. policy was we couldn't do that. We could give them tents and blankets and food, but we couldn't give them any guns. They were very upset because they said, "Well, where do you think we got all the guns we have? We got them from you."
Right.
And so we came back to the floor of the Congress and told our colleagues, that, hey, we're supplying the Mujahideen. And I remember my colleagues, I was 40 years younger at the time, saying, no, Nolan, we're not financing them. You're a member of the Congress. You would know that if we were. We would all know that. Well, I said, well, I just came from there, and they got American guns and they got American weapons. And, of course, with Charlie Wilson's war, it came out. There were only like 5 members of the whole Congress that knew about it, and we were supplying them. Why is that critical? Well, because the Mujahideen morphed into the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Now, we didn't finance them for that purpose, but, some reasonable people might have come to the conclusion that, hey, just because someone is the enemy of our enemy doesn't make them our friend.
Right.
And so, we could go on down the line. And if we had all day, because I've lived there, speak enough Arabic, hopefully I studied it to get me out of trouble, as opposed to getting myself into trouble. But, we know Saddam Hussein had gas weapons, for crying out loud. We had the sales receipts, we recently, the idea.
And we sold them to him.
Yeah.
Don Rumsfeld went over.
Yeah. Let's finance, let's train and equip the Free Syrian rebels, the good guys. On one of those programs, we spent $1.2 billion and we trained 5 guys.
Right.
Like, really. What they don't like to tell you is we did train considerably more than those 5 guys, but they turned all their guns and their weapons and used their training against us.
Right.
So nothing's ever as it appears in the Middle East. We get ourselves in trouble time and time and again. Now back to your 28 pages. We've been lied to time and time and again by our government. They haven't told us the truth, let alone the whole truth. And I learned from a good friend of mine, Nancy Haggerty was her name, back home, that there were 28 pages that had been disclosed, had been classified in the report, in the Joint Committee report on who was responsible for the 9/11. I ask colleagues in the Congress, they don't know anything. Most of them don't know anything about it. So I thought, well, that's curious, I like to say that curiosity has been the bane of my existence. Whenever I hear a new idea, I want to examine it. 99% of it is hogwash, but someone there is the next great truth, and I don't want to be the last one to realize the world isn't flat. So I found out that in fact they had been classified. I joined Walter Jones and a number of others, increasingly greater in numbers, saying disclose them to the American public. I went through some elaborate procedures to get access to those, had to go through a number of different clearances. I know of at least one member who was denied access to them. So I know who financed a large, significant portion, the largest portion of the
9/11 attacks.
The 9/11 attacks. And it's not hyperbole, Tom. I mean, the report gives the names, the account numbers, and the amounts of money that the people who supplied the money.
Well,
and it gives the same account numbers and the names and the amounts that were received and who received the money.
Mark,
and
we have to wrap it up. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-536-2370.
Congressman Rick Nolan with us here. We'll be back with your calls right after the news at the bottom of the hour. Welcome back. 27 minutes, whatever it is before the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Congressman Rick Nolan, representing the great state of Minnesota, in the studio with us. I'm not making fun of you the way I hear the Minnesota. I grew up in Michigan.
Yeah,
and
hey, we make fun of ourselves all the time. We're we didn't realize we had an accent.
Kind of semi-Scandinavian accent. My grandparents on my father's side were from Norway, and they settled in northern Michigan in Newego, and it's all Norwegians up there. And in Scandinavia, it's mostly Swedes. And
we're the Scandinavian state.
Yeah.
We have more than any other state in the union.
Oh, very, very interesting.
Got a little Scandinavian blood in me myself.
There you go. Okay, well, let's pick up some phone calls and see what our questioners have to say.
You got any calls in there from Ole or Sven or Lars or Lena? Any of them? They follow the politics too, don't you know?
Okay. You do that very well. We have from Los Angeles, Donald is calling. Hey, Donald, you're on the air.
I thought I heard a little static. I figured that might have been me going on.
That was you.
I'd like to thank Rick for endorsing Bernie Sanders, and I actually would like to tell you both and anyone who's listening how to encourage more of the Bernie or bust people to cast their down ticket votes for candidates that they feel would best support Bernie Sanders. And that, in my opinion, is to remind them that there are endorsers of Bernie Sanders running and, of course, supporting them rather than, giving up, as so many people are telling them to do, is a better way of supporting Bernie Sanders than not voting. It is, it's better vote for Bernie whether he's on the ballot or not, and show up and do those down ticket votes for Bernie-crats than rather than saying, okay, well, I've been told I have to vote for Hillary, so I'm just going to give up and not vote.
Gotcha. Donald, thank you for the call. Hang on just a second. We've got to. I appreciate the call. It's a little loud in his ear. If you could just turn it down just a wee bit, and it's okay. You can walk in front of the camera. Nobody's going to mind.
Yeah, forgive us here, but it's so loud that's kind of distorting your voice. There
you go. So you can hear better now.
Yeah,
does that sound better? Okay, great.
Down a little more.
Just a little bit more. There. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. All right, so, Congressman, you've endorsed Bernie Sanders?
I have, yes.
Okay. And your thoughts on the best way to bring Sanders supporters into the fold of the Democratic Party, specifically Sanders supporters who may never have been involved in politics, who may have always considered themselves independents, to say, hey, there's a home for you in the Democratic Party?
Well, that's what we want to be able to say, and that's what this is all about. And when they are open, Bernie tends to win. Mm-hmm. And so I think to the extent to which he keeps winning within the framework that we have, which is somewhat difficult, his chances increase. Yes, they're remote, but they're still possible. And, you and I both been around long enough to know that things can change rather dramatically, rather quickly. So, Hillary went to the convention, and I think Bernie should go to the convention. He's got a great platform. He's got a message that's resonating with the American people. And the more people hear that, the better it's going to be for our party and for our country. And I want him to continue to carry on.
There you go. Okay, thank you. Jeff in Denver. Jeff, you're on the air with Congressman Nolan.
Yeah, I've got a question about voting, but first I want to mention to everybody, and since you've got a few million listeners, most of you, the people who are listening, know somebody in California, and they should push the people in California to check their voter registration status.
Right.
The great news is you can still register to vote in California. Just Google California voter registration. The first link will take you there.
Okay.
And you can also, but there's also been a lot of problems with people being in the wrong party in California registration. So you can check that out, and you must check that out. But please push your friends. We could, with 1 million listeners plus, we could affect a few million votes.
Yeah. Actually, according to Talkers Magazine, we're at 3 million listeners. But yes,
so
agreed.
Everybody knows we could affect 3 million or more votes in California.
There you go. Okay, so your question for the congressman.
Going back, as you mentioned, with the open primaries before you, what do you think? To me, the California system is really nice in that anybody who's not in a party, and by the way, people should not be an independent in California. They have to be not affiliated. But to me, that's a nice system because people can, just vote.
It's a semi-closed primary.
You can't cross parties.
Yeah, it's a semi-closed.
And then the other thing is, question: would you like to see changed about the way we count votes and cast votes?
Okay. Thank you.
The way we count and
cast votes. Yeah.
Well, I've introduced what I call my Restore Democracy Act. We've talked about repealing Citizens United. We've talked about the Stop Act for members of Congress to don't go to Washington and dial for dollars. Go to work on the people's business. But I put together a rather comprehensive plan, any part of which I think would be an improvement. Altogether would be just the greatest renaissance ever in American democracy. I think, speaking of California, we need to have independent reapportionment commissions. The fact that we have 25, 30 competitive congressional seats out of 430.
In other words, do away with gerrymandering.
Yeah, do away with the gerrymandering. I would like to see very strict limits on campaign spending. Most Western democracies have, 40, 50, 60, 90-day campaigns. My legislation calls for 50. There's nothing magic about that number, but I know that we can't have 365 days.
Right.
That doesn't work. I think we need online registration. I think my congressional district, which is one of the most competitive in the country, we also have the highest, one of the 2 or 3 highest voter turnouts. And I think it's actually number 1. I could be corrected on that, but in some years past when I've run, it has been the number 1 in the country, and Minnesota is right up there at the top. So we got to put an end to this, voter suppression. Make it easy for people to vote. Make it easy for them.
Minnesota
to
allows same-day registration.
You can show up to vote, and you can register at that time.
Right. We should do that nationally.
Absolutely. I'd like to see. I've attended some election contests around the rest of the world. Voting Day is a national holiday. We can celebrate National Peanut Butter and Milk Day. And everything else under the sun. I think voting should be a national holiday. And then perhaps most important of all of the things, I think we should have a system of small donor public financing of campaigns and elections. A number of states have done that, and it works quite nicely. And that's another, way of getting all this dark, secret money out of campaigns and elections. And then lastly, my Restore Democracy legislation calls for a restoration of regular order. And we talked a little bit about that before, but that's the process where if something's going to be considered by the Congress, it comes up through the committee under open rules, considered by the full House or Senate under open rules where anybody can offer their amendments and their ideas. And that's how you find the common ground. That's how you get, and that's not happening very often anymore.
Because we've been doing this kind of variation on the so-called Hastert rule, which is that if you can't pass a piece of legislation with Republicans, the Speaker of the House refuses to even bring it to the floor.
Yeah. And immigration, big issue. Yeah, it never comes before the floor. These wars of choice in the Middle East, they haven't been authorized. Even though the president has asked for authorization, I would vote against the authorization, quite frankly. But the Constitution is pretty clear who declares a war. It's not the president, it's the Congress.
Right.
And the other reason why things are coming up under closed rules, not having gone through committees, and then coming to the floor of the House, where you have either no or very limited number of amendments allowable, because everybody's busy across the street raising money.
Right. Yeah, there you go. Okay. Let's see. Rich in Greenwood, Indiana. You're on the air with Congressman Rick Nolan.
Hi, Tom. Thanks so much. I began my call request with an idea about truth and lies, and I'm realizing a wonderful opportunity to ask the congressman. There's a book that I learned about called Lies Incorporated: The World of Post-Truth Politics. And the ideas that were discussed in that had me wonder about what is truth in politics. Tom, you may remember, as I restate my praise of Bernie, that I called him legit true, that he has an unbroken covenant with language. And there is this this idea of salesmanship that can sometimes pass as truth, and I see the carnival barking of Trump.
Rich, I got you. Pardon my interruption, but I just got a 60-second cue to the break. So let's toss this to the congressman for his thoughts on your comments.
Well, real quickly, I mean, Bernie is 100% right, and quite frankly, part of Trump's popularity, he understands what the problems are. I couldn't. Nobody has the slightest clue as to what his solutions might be. But the political system is rigged. The economic system is rigged for the benefit of the rich and the powerful. And the middle class is getting crushed. The upper class, are hauling in money and profits and incomes unparalleled anywhere in human history. So. What made this country a great country was its great middle class and the opportunities that it provided, became a model for the world. And if we don't turn this thing around, it could have some pretty disastrous consequences.
Time to reverse Reaganism.
Yeah. So one of my fellow members said, we were having a discussion, they talk about trickle-down economics. She says, there's no more trickle-down economics. It's just, give me the money. Give me the money. Give it to me now.
There you go.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Rick Nolan after this. And Mark, welcome back, by the way. Mark, watching Free Speech TV on Dish Network in Orlando, Florida. Mark, you're on the air with Congressman Nolan.
Hey, Congressman Nolan. I wish you were, my district, we got Grayson for the time being, but if you were here, I'd vote for you. And I like what you're saying. And I think Tom's show with Brunch for Bernie has given me the information why I feel comfortable with the people with Bernie. And why I'm a Bernie for Bus person. And I think that, hearing your views on this show is so important to see that there's many more people out there with these viewpoints. And I thank Tom for allowing you on the air and having this interaction.
Thank you, Mark. Let's get to your question.
My question was regarding a serious nature, and why I'm a Bernie for Bus person is climate change. And ExxonMobil has lied, and we know that they lied, and some people are subpoenaing them to go, that there possibly is going to be some court action, I guess, in California. What I'd like to see is we have panels for all these things. Let's get to the bottom of what happened with Exxon. Let's take them to court in a state where there's capital punishment. Well, I'm against it, but while we still have it, and let's try to put the beast to rest. But I'd like to know what the congressman would what he thinks he can do to help with climate change, I guess, would be
okay.
Easier.
Mark, thank you for the call. Congressman?
Well, in my judgment, climate change threatens the survival of our species on Earth. So, there couldn't be a more compelling public policy issue than addressing climate change. And it breaks your heart to not see a better public policy discussion, about that. So, what can we do about it? Well, it's all about reducing the carbon footprint. My wife and I did plant 500 trees here last week. So,
whoa.
Yeah. And
how did you do that?
One at a time.
You physically did it.
My wife and I have planted over 100,000 trees in our lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah, we love planting trees. And I was just going through my schedule, and we're going to be planting some more trees up in the Voyageurs National Park. But as you know, they take carbon out of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But we need to get away from our dependence on fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. We need to invest in solar. We need to invest in wind. We need to invest in.
Would you support a carbon tax to make that happen?
Yeah, in fact, I'm one of the sponsors of carbon tax legislation. And the Progressive Caucus, led by Keith Ellison, they do a great job. And we take the tax revenues from that and reimburse 100% of it back to the people, so that the companies themselves have to work harder to find alternatives, but the average citizen doesn't get stuck with utility bills that they can't afford. It's a very good proposal. And by the way, you mentioned your congressman there, Alan Grayson. He's one of the great ones. He's fantastic. I love Alan.
I'm glad to hear you you speak well of him. He's been, Mr. Reed and he have been having a little bit of a battle, but
he reminds me of Paul Wellstone, or Hubert Humphrey. I mean, he's not afraid to speak truth to power and say, and he's exceptionally bright and exceptionally capable. And we just need more people like that.
Yeah. I've met him a few times. He's been on this program quite a number of times. Good guy. We'll be right back with more of your questions, Congressman Rick Nolan. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Will in Blakesley, Pennsylvania, listening on Sirius XM. You are on the air with Congressman Rick Nolan.
Hey, Tom, and hey, Representative Nolan. I love what you're saying. Another fellow Swede right here, Landstrom. Anyway, my question is very specific. Would you be willing to sponsor legislation to repeal the awful, god-awful 2005 bankruptcy bill, or at least the part
the repeal of what?
Outlawed, being able to discharge student loan debt, private student loan debt via bankruptcy. This is killing our entire country, including my own daughter. So would you be willing to consider that?
Right. So in other words, in fact, I had thank you, Will. When that bill was being considered, I had a Democratic senator on this program who was defending making it so that people could never declare bankruptcy on student loans, saying, well, they have to learn responsibility when they're young. It's not worked out that way. Is it time to reconsider the 2006 bankruptcy bill?
Absolutely. It's time to reconsider, reappeal, whatever it takes. In fact, I have my staff working on it at this point in time. And it came up in the context of the Central States Teamsters pension plan, where the Teamsters, the working men and women, paid in every penny, every nickel that they had contracted for, and 13,000 of the companies that had signed similar contractual agreements didn't pay in their funds. So now people in their 70s and 80s are expected to have their pensions cut in half or maybe lose them entirely. And there are hundreds of other pension funds in the same place. Why did this happen? How did 13,000 companies get away with that? Well, among other things, it's the bankruptcy law.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The argument, apparently, I wasn't here at the time, was, we can trust the companies to have the money for the fund. Well, through mergers, acquisitions, and bankruptcies, why the last ones to get paid were the pension funds. Right. So, Wall Street got paid, the banks got paid, everybody got paid. And there was never any money left over when it came to people's pension funds. Amazing. And then the idea that I'm a businessman. I spent 32 years of my life in business. Mm-hmm. And the idea that I can refinance my loans is wonderful. I'm grateful for that. But the fact that a student can't, where did they become second, third, or fourth class citizens?
Or chattel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is your indenture here, and you're stuck with it. Exactly. And by the way, a $28,000 debt is not $28,000. By the time someone gets done paying for it over 20, 25 years, they end up paying, in excess of $100,000. Yeah. In fact, I looked at some numbers. A $38,000 debt actually ends up over 25 years to be about a $128,000 payment. So
that's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Linda in Deerfield Beach, Florida, listening on Sirius XM. You're on the air with Congressman Nolan.
Thank you, Congressman, for taking my call. I am one of those pensioners that you're talking about. Bill S-1631/HR 2844, COPA, and, of course, the other bill, and these were both written by Senator Sanders, Bill 2147/HR 4029, the Pension Accountability Act. We need to know when you're going to vote on that, because they just sent us a letter, the Treasury Department, saying that they were not going to bail us out, and this fund will be depleted in exactly 10 years. I was supposed to get $1,400 a month. I'm slashed to $436, and if it's depleted in 10 years, I get nothing. I get nothing for all my hard work. Absolutely nothing. And we need this act counted on, voted on. Senator Sanders wrote it. And, of course, I voted for him, but I will vote for any Democrat because I believe that you truly do care about the people. So can you please find it in your heart to get this on the floor and get this voted on?
Okay. Linda, thank you for the call. Congressman?
Well, we'll do everything we can to try to make that happen. I must confess to you that I'm not particularly optimistic. Tom brought it up before when we were talking about the rules of the House. The Republicans control the House and the Senate, and they decide what we get to hear and what we don't get to hear and what we get to amend and what we don't get to amend. But what has happened to the Teamsters, I mean, I could not think of anything that is more unfair, that is more unjust, that is more un-American to punish the only people that honored the terms of their contract by taking their pensions away in their senior years. I can't believe this is happening. And the rest of the listeners out there in the American public, if you think this is just about Teamsters pension funds, get over it. This is about defined benefit pension plans. And the listener made the point that the fund is only good for 10 years. Well, from what I understand, that is the case. And I've met with the managers, and I've met with Ken Feinberg and Treasury and everybody. So it's an interesting question, and that is, what's the big hurry to do away with these people's pension funds? Obviously, we should act as soon as possible. But unless you're trying to do away with people's pensions, we've got a little time to look at this thing. So this next election is going to be pretty doggone important. And if we can't persuade, then we will do everything we can to persuade the Republicans to let us find a way to fix this thing and fix it now. But we got a little time to work with us. If they won't let us do it, we got an election coming up. And I've often thought, it's a heck of a lot easier to elect some people who will represent you than it is to change the mind of some stubborn, recalcitrant opponent. I had a little amendment the other day, and the members, and I'm good at getting my amendments through, but it was in committee, and it failed, and several of the Republican members came up afterwards and said, I really liked your amendment. I think it was a great amendment. I wanted to vote for the amendment, but the party said I can't. Really? What the hell did you get elected for? Do what you think is right.
Yeah, there you go. Congressman Rick Nolan, the website nolan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rick Nolan, RickNolan, MN, as in Minnesota.
Yeah, you betcha.
You betcha. Congressman, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Tom. Nice to be honored to have you here. Thank you for what you do. You're a great source of enlightenment, and the country needs it.
Thank you. And to you, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It does require you to participate. So please, get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you on Monday. Have a great week.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag You're It.